trapped in the sauna. The temperature inside had soared to a blistering 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and the three of them would be completely dehydrated within minutes. Lisa gripped a water ladle tightly, frantically hammering it against the window over and over again. Meanwhile, George grabbed a towel, determined to retrieve a stone from the furnace. The rock was scorching hot to the touch, making him wince as he tried to handle it. He attempted to use a spoon as a tool, but it snapped under the pressure. Finally managing to extract one of the stones, he immediately began cooling it down by dunking it in water while calling for his companions to bring over a wooden bucket. Once the stone had cooled sufficiently, George began striking the glass with all his might. But the window proved incredibly sturdy, refusing to give way even as his hands began to bleed from the repeated impacts. The pain was excruciating, yet he couldn't afford to stop. Without oxygen, they'd suffocate even if the heat didn't kill them first. No matter how hard he pounded, the glass remained intact. George let out a furious roar of frustration, then grabbed the stone with both hands and put every ounce of his remaining strength into one final blow. At last, the glass shattered. Lisa immediately shoved him aside and pressed her face to the opening, greedily gulping down fresh air. Anna quickly squeezed in beside her, and all three began shouting desperately for help. Unbeknownst to them, a ladder had been wedged firmly against the door from the outside, trapping them inside. 5 hours earlier, 2 men and 2 women had arrived at Anna's uncle's house for a holiday visit and Christmas party. During their stay, they discovered the sauna and decided to indulge themselves. They were drinking, chatting, and having a wonderful time when Anna initially hesitated to join them. She suffered from claustrophobia and felt uncomfortable in enclosed spaces. However, her friends' persistent invitations eventually won her over, and she reluctantly entered the sauna with the group. Both men had been drinking heavily throughout the evening. Paul, who was particularly intoxicated, suddenly confessed his feelings to Lisa. When she rejected his advances, Paul became angry and stumbled backward, accidentally knocking himself to the ground. As he got back up, he carelessly propped a ladder against the door without thinking. Lisa heard the commotion and shook her head in disgust at his behavior. About 5 minutes later, the temperature began climbing uncomfortably high, and they decided it was time to leave. But when they tried to push open the door, they discovered it wouldn't budge. Anna, with her claustrophobia, immediately began to panic. The men tried to reassure the women, insisting they would find a way out and suggesting this was probably just one of Paul's pranks. George began throwing his full weight against the door repeatedly, but it remained solidly closed. Lisa dropped to her knees and began screaming for help through the gap under the door while the men joined in with their own desperate shouts. But no response came. The temperature continued to rise to terrifying levels, and the group finally grasped the severity of their situation. They knew that if the human body couldn't regulate its temperature, unconsciousness and vomiting would follow, and prolonged exposure would be fatal. It was then that one of the women spotted a thermometer mounted on the wall. When the men examined it more closely, they realized it was an automatic temperature control system that would shut off once it reached a predetermined setting. Unfortunately, the control switch was located outside the sauna, completely beyond their reach. One of the women suggested smashing the device, but the men worried that damaging it might cause the temperature to spiral completely out of control, causing the furnace to continue heating indefinitely. By this point, all of them were drenched in sweat and growing increasingly desperate.